America, from the ground up, is made possible in part by a grant from the Michigan Humanities Council, an affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Central Michigan University College of Humanities, Social, and Behavioral Sciences. The Kirby Foundation, a family foundation supporting education. And B.K. Bradshaw, author of the Crystal Brave series of young adult novels, encouraging young people to explore archaeology.
For most of us, this is what American history looks like. But the real history of America is down here in the dirt. And the archaeological history of America that we uncover will be the story of all of us. And modern archaeologists are using some of the most advanced scientific investigation techniques to uncover America's hidden history. And over the next 6 episodes, we're going to dig into the hidden story of America's frontier. It's a story that takes place in the spectacular forts, cities, and sites along the inland water highways of North America. Archaeology is like detective work. This could be a shovel of dirt, some rocks, organic matter, a little bit of vegetation. But if you look closely and you know what you're looking for, it could be the voice of America's past. Centuries before the arrival of the first Europeans, as many as 35,000 people lived in the largest city in prehistoric America. But by 1400, that city was abandoned. An entire civilization vanished. Who were these people? What were they doing here? And what happened to them?
It's all down there. The houses, temples, burials of this magnificent, enigmatic city. Our job is to use all the tools in our archaeological toolkit to find out what happened here.
The mystery begins in Arkansas. There, the site of a mysterious lost city holds the first clues to the fascinating, untold story of America's lost civilization. At Toltec, I first encountered the massive earthen mounds and ceremonial plazas that would become the hallmark of America's lost civilization. The Toltec Mound site here in Arkansas is not a classic Mississippian civilization site, but it shares some really interesting parallels with it, including mounds and a central plaza.
This is a wonderful site. This is a prehistoric site. This place was occupied probably somewhere around 1,200 years ago, between about the years 650 AD to about 1050 AD. And what we think was going on here is this is more than just a place where everybody got to live. This was kind of a special place. This was the ceremonial center for the people that of this area.
Toltec is a site that stands at the crossroads of geography and culture. I talked with archaeologist Michael Nassani about it. So Michael, the changes that we're seeing taking place at Toltec, how do those fit in to what's happening later in the broader Mississippian world?
Well, Toltec's a really exciting place because it's emerging at a time when there are vast changes that have taken place in native history. So people have been manipulating plants and cultivating plants of varying sorts. They're starting to adopt maize agriculture. We're seeing technological changes take place. For example, the widespread adoption of the bow and arrow. And we're seeing these sorts of changes along with population growth and so forth. And so people are beginning to congregate in these large centers, these large civic ceremonial centers like Toltec, where they're engaged in mound building, and these are reflecting changes in social and political organization that had taken place at this time, really prior to the development of Mississippian society.
I left Michael and headed towards St. Louis, Missouri and Cahokia. Centuries before Columbus set sail, Cahokia was a massive walled city at the heart of a Native American civilization that stretched from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico and from Georgia to Oklahoma. Who were these mysterious people? What were they doing here? And what happened to their temple mounds, ceremonial plazas, and impressive walled cities? The Mississippians developed a massively influential culture, and archaeologists look for certain elements to identify their sites.
Mississippian site plans seem to share some basic features with Cahokia, including large platform mounds and a broad central plaza. A city like Cahokia is one massive public works project. The defensive wall that surrounded the center of the city took more than 20,000 trees to build. The 40-acre plaza at the center of the city was all leveled by hand.
And at its heart was Monk's Mound, a massive monument more than 10 stories tall and larger than the Great Pyramid at Giza.
A mound like Monk's Mound has about 22 million cubic feet of earth in it. That's about 44 million of those, and they built it without modern equipment.
Archaeologists think that Monk's Mound was built in several phases over a couple of hundred years. To demonstrate the staggering scale of work involved, I visited the largest limestone quarry in the world in Rogers City, Michigan.
Today, this modern mining equipment moves a staggering 200 tons of earth at a time.
The folks at the Carmeuse Quarry moved more than 56,000 tons of earth in a few seconds. But Monk's Mound would take more than 20 explosions of this magnitude just to fill it, and it would take one of the largest mining vehicles on Earth more than a month to move that volume of earth. But archaeology is about more than monuments and shiny stuff. Archaeologist Neil Lopino and I talked about how archaeological science helps us understand prehistory.
And when you go back into the prehistoric past, you don't have people to talk to understand what they're thinking. And all you have are, as an archaeologist, artifacts, material remains, evidence of, what was left behind. And sometimes that evidence is very spotty.
And fortunately for science, human beings are really messy, and all the stuff we leave behind builds up in layers in the ground, and we call that stratigraphy. And archaeologists can dig down through that and understand the past.
The trick in archaeology is finding the right place to dig. And even within an archaeological site, some places have more to tell us than others. And for an archaeologist, the best place to find out information about what people were doing on a site is to dig into their garbage. Think about it. The stuff we throw away says a lot about who we are as a people. By rummaging around in the contents of this modern garbage dump, we're able to build up a picture of what life is like for the average American. We can find information about what we might be eating for breakfast. We can also find information about what kind of food we might have for dinner, what kind of animals we're keeping as pets, and a little bit about the latest fashions.
So what is the archaeology telling us about Cahokia and how it fit into the broader Mississippian world?
Cahokia is the largest city in the area of what becomes the United States before the 19th century. And for Cahokia, maize fueled that population growth. Archaeologists think that there was a surplus being produced here at Cahokia, and a lot of that is coming in from the outlying villages as a form of tribute for the elite to use as they see fit. It's sort of like taxation.
The Cahokians used their wealth to foster a network of trade that brought goods from distant regions. One of the northernmost Mississippian sites is in Ashland, Wisconsin, where archaeologist Lynn Goldstein and her team are investigating what happened there. Lynn is a leading expert in the archaeology of the Great Lakes region. We talked about the links between the sites.
There is a link to Cahokia, but how closely linked it is not clear. there were some tests done by archaeologists who study bone chemistry of some bones that come from the northwest mound here. And one individual actually has a bone chemistry signature that matches that at Cahokia.
Lynn's students had unearthed some objects that might tell us more about how Mississippian society functioned. I met Lynn at her lab, and she told me that they had found some shell beads from the Gulf of Mexico.
And we have this, which just looks like a flat Cheerio, but it's a shell bead. Almost certainly it's from the Florida Gulf Coast. And then we also have a lot of copper. More copper than I've ever found, I have to say. But
we have, and these are curled pieces of copper, and what are they being used for?
Okay, so copper in the upper Great Lakes then and is generally what's beaten copper, so it's a cold technique, and you hammer it very thin, and then what they're doing here is they're rolling it into a bead.
Right.
And you can see
right there. Right, so we've got a trade connection then from the Great Lakes with copper all the way to the Gulf Coast with the shell.
Exactly.
Fantastic.
Don Gaff is an archaeologist who studies how people manipulate landscapes, and he told me more about Aztalan.
What they were doing was they were sculpting the land surface, modifying it into a system of terraces or stair steps.
So we've got a really classic example here in the terraced landscape of some serious earth moving and altering the landscape of the site. Do we find that kind of classic southeastern ceremonial complex plaza at Aztalan that we see at places like Cahokia or other Mississippian sites?
Yeah, you absolutely do see that kind of plaza here. When you look at maps of Aztalan, between the two mounds, there is a plaza area that has been sort of set aside from the rest of the community.
It's looking like copper and shell from the Gulf of Mexico are important to the Cahokian elite, and their sites all emphasize massive earthworks that suggest a very organized society. John Kelly is an archaeologist who has investigated Cahokia for more than 4 decades. Back at Cahokia, I caught up with him while he was excavating a copper workshop site that might help us understand more about Cahokia's rulers.
Most of what we found are the fragments. They've been hammered very thin, and they've been probably made into plates. And we don't have the plates. All we have are the margins, probably where they trimmed them and broke them off.
As you would in a workshop environment, right?
And so someone else, we suspect, is getting the actual plates.
So it's a trade item that's being manufactured here and perhaps used locally or maybe sent further afield?
Let's set the notion of trade aside. Let's look at a broader context that these materials they're working with are very powerful. They're imbued with power. They come from a faraway place, presumably the upper Great Lakes.
I asked John to tell me about the ceremonial significance of other objects from Cahokia.
And my colleague Jim Brown, what he did was to, in having worked with materials, understood the early importance of Cahokia is that the symbolism, the art style that we see in those items developed here or in this general region.
And then diffuses out to these other centers.
Then goes out to these other places. So it becomes widespread. And some people take it a little bit further. It's like a missionary effort, going out. But I don't think that's what it's about. I think it's taking this, probably these long-held traditions, these long-held stories, and transferring them into a medium, transferring them so that the people that have that ritual knowledge can still share it, but share it over a very large area.
I met Bill Eimsinger and asked him to tell me more about Mississippian religious practice.
One of the primary things we see is perhaps originating here at Cahokia is religious symbolism. Are figurines made out of a reddish colored stone called Missouri flint clay that originates the other side of St. Louis, probably within roughly a day's walk or so of here. And it seems that figurines that are being made a lot of them are fertility figurines, mostly women involved with agricultural activities or plants or symbolism.
The archaeology is telling us that Cahokia is the spiritual and cultural epicenter of the Mississippian world. But who was in charge of all that wealth and power?
The great chief was considered the son of the sun. And it could be a woman. It didn't necessarily have to be a male. Women were great sons too.
Right. The great sun controlled the vast wealth of Cahokia, and they used the ceremonial objects to reinforce their political influence. But how did it work?
Religion has been a major component of every human society since Fred Flintstone and his cronies invented fire. Once you can understand the religious practices of a people, you can open up a window into their view of the cosmos. The Mississippians worship the sun god. They believe that the world was made of three parts: an upper realm where the gods lived, a middle realm where man lived, and an underworld. And right here atop Monk's Mound, the great sun occupied a special place between God and man. Symbols of authority are all around us, and we live in the shadow of political power every day. Combine control of religious authority and political power, and you have a potent cocktail indeed. The landscape here at Cahokia records the story of that power. The post here at the center of Woodhenge is aligned with Monk's Mound so that on the equinoxes, it looks like the sun rises out of the great sun's house. A hengiform monument is a calendar device, and here at Cahokia, it's functioning in much the same capacity of its more famous cousin in England, Stonehenge.
The monuments at Cahokia were built using the vast wealth available to the Great Sun, including gifts from subordinate chiefs and corvée labor. Corvée labor is a bit like the work obligation a medieval serf owed to their landlord. It wasn't just the massive earthen mounds at Cahokia that were monuments. Burials are an important way of communicating wealth, status, and power. It helps to think of funerals as theater. They were meant to be seen and tell the mourners about the power and prestige of the dead and his family. Our friend Birdman here might not be too comfy on his bed of 20,000 imported shells, but those shells are rare and expensive, and his arrow collection is chock full of expensive imported material.
And by investing all that wealth and power into monuments like Woodhenge and Monk's Mound behind me, it's as if the great sun was reminding you that from the time the sun rose to the time it set, everything in this world, including you, belonged to him. We're starting to build up a picture of what life was like for the Mississippians 600 to 1,000 years ago. At its height, Cahokia is ruled over by a succession of powerful chiefs who act as intermediaries between the gods and man.
And a revolution in technology is helping us to understand the broader Mississippian world. At Angel Mounds in Indiana, I met with Jeremy Wilson to talk about how his team is using some of the most advanced scientific technology to peer beneath the Earth's surface.
My co-investigator, Bill Monahan in particular, who's a geologist by training, has cored through Mound A here and learned that deposits from both the base and the top of the mound are radiometrically indistinguishable. So what that means is we've done radiocarbon dating from both the top and the bottom, and those dates come out to roughly AD 1100.
So it's being built pretty much at the same time.
Yeah, my co-PI estimates that the mound was constructed in about 10 years' time.
Wow, that's a huge undertaking.
I asked Jeremy to tell me more about the process.
This is called a continuous core system. So as you can see, we are in the process of driving down the cores through the top of the mound. The mound is about 2.5 meters in height, and the cores are extracted in 4-foot lengths.
So they drive it down and then pull that clear plastic tube up out of the ground, and that's going to have the soil sample in it.
Correct, yeah, and it'll have, as you can see in the background, the entire core is sheathed to ensure the recovery of the sediments or the strata all the way down to the base of the mound.
And then we take that back to the lab, slice it open, and analyze the core.
Yeah.
Back at the lab, Jeremy's colleague Edward Herman walked me through the process of analyzing the core samples.
What we have here are the actual sediment samples.
Okay.
So you might have seen that we pulled these plastic tubes out of the ground while coring. The sediment essentially is forced up into these tubes and gives us a record of the stratigraphic history of that particular landform and possibly even before that landform was constructed.
Fantastic. Well, let's open one up and have a look.
Okay. We're going to start at the bottom. So this is the lowest core that we pulled.
Okay.
We have a total of about 12 feet here. So we're going to look at the bottom 4.
So we're down at the bottom here about 12 feet deep.
Right.
Okay.
And now that we have this, I need to actually begin to look at the stratigraphy. So,
we're going to slice that off and just literally section the core.
Exactly. And this gives us a much better look at how the stratigraphic layers were put in place. And it appears to be a natural horizon. This seems to be lower than what the Mississippian people, they actually built a mound on top of this.
So this essentially would be the underground from the base of the mound itself.
This looks to be like mound fill, like what we see here, how they actually build the mound. And we'll tell in the next core, at the bottom of the next core, which would be connected to that.
That next point on out.
Exactly, and then we'll be able to see.
Open this up and have a look.
This one's, I'm gonna have to crack.
There we go.
Good. And we'll go through that same process.
Okay, we're gonna section it again, scrape off.
And there's some sand. Ooh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and we're not seeing any of that in this core.
No, that was probably anthropogenic. People put that on there. And the other thing that we look for, in order to have an understanding of the chronology, we look for organic matter. And what I have here is some charcoal.
Right.
And what that might tell us is the time period. We can get radiocarbon dates on that, and then have a really good idea as to when the construction occurred.
Archaeologists at Angel Mounds are also using remote sensing equipment to scan below the ground.
So Jeremy, what is it that Matt's doing here in the field behind us?
We are doing a specific type of remote sensing known as magnetometry. So Matt is walking back and forth on what we call transects, which are straight lines. And as he is walking, the magnetometer is picking up subsurface readings of positive or negative charges.
So it's like bouncing a signal down and then measuring the sort of rebound, if you will.
Exactly. It's basically measuring things that are emitting some type of polarity beneath the ground surface.
Matt and I went over the amazing results of the scans.
So Matt, here in the center, we've got a rectilinear, or in sort of plain English, a rectangle-shaped structure. What could that be?
Well, since we haven't yet ground truthed it, we will just call it a magnetic anomaly. But nature doesn't make straight lines. So when you see straight lines like this in the ground, you know, it's usually something that people have constructed.
Right.
And the size of this is probably almost 30 meters on a side. So that's a very good possibility that that is a structure either on the mound or possibly under the mound, and that the mound itself was a capping event on top of a structure that was on the original ground surface.
So built up over top of it at a later date.
Okay. So what you're seeing there is probably a result of the construction method that we see here at Angel, which is wall trenching, where an entire trench is dug out, posts are put into it, and then soil is backfilled into that.
Right.
So depending on the soil that goes back into it, you get either a high or a low in the magnetic reading.
Yeah, and what you see then in the reading is these really nice, well-defined trench lines, if that's what it proves to be when we excavate.
When it all works out how it should, you get a real pretty picture.
This really represents a new era in archaeology where we can do either non or minimally invasive techniques to explore archaeological sites.
The archaeology is telling us that from about 800 to 1300, Cahokia was at the heart of a vibrant Native American civilization that covered much of what is now the eastern United States. The Great Sons used the wealth of Cahokia to extend their influence across the Mississippian world, from the Gulf of Mexico to the Great Lakes. But what the Cahokians couldn't have known was that their power was about to dim. Whether from overcrowding, warfare, environmental degradation, or some combination of all of these, by 1400, Cahokia was abandoned.
While Cahokia may have collapsed by 1400, the Mississippian civilization continued. Here at Parkin Mounds in Arkansas, we have a well-documented account of a visit by European explorer Hernando de Soto in the 1500s. Parkin is unique among Mississippian centers, precisely because we have a documentary record that tells us about the people who lived here. We know that the Great Son's name was Koski, and that Koski ruled over a town of about 2,000 people here at Parkin. And in the region where the Tyronza and St. Francis rivers converge, he ruled over a network of about 20 subservient villages. I'm standing in what's left of the moat that used to surround Parkin. The bridge here spans about 85 feet across, and archaeologists think that that's about the width of the moat. In front of me, there would have been a 10-foot wall that would have been on the other side of the moat. So if you're trying to come through, you'd have to cross the moat and go up over the defensive wall in order to get to the city. When European explorers first reached what is now the eastern United States, they encountered a region dotted with cities and towns. And the native peoples they encountered were far more sophisticated and diverse than either early historians would have us believe or the explorers themselves.
Join us next time when the adventure continues as we dig into the archaeological history of the fur trade in America from the ground up. Check out the America from the Ground Up website for crew blogs, behind-the-scenes photographs, and more.
America from the Ground Up is made possible in part by a grant from the Michigan Humanities Council, an affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Central Michigan University College of Humanities, Social, and Behavioral Sciences. The Kirby Foundation, a family foundation supporting education. And B.K. Bradshaw, author of the Crystal Brave series of young adult novels, encouraging young people to explore archaeology.